Hello, hello. Here I am again, at least. Hopefully it will be a we sometime soon. So I am just want to acknowledge I'm once again here on my computer, which it does this funny thing where it's a mirror image. Hi, Jenna. Hi, Leah. So every time I turn one way, it has me turn the opposite, and it just kind of trips me out. So do my best with that. Oh, yay! It can just be me and you, Jenna. No, I see a few other people that have joined. Hi, Monica. So I've had this piece percolating in me for a while, specifically around deserving. And there's a few different ways I want to look at it. And then it came up again today when I was working with a client this morning. And so it just felt very alive. I have this tendency, I have like a, I don't know, you raise your hand if this is true about you, but I have like a Google Doc that I think has about 200. Monica, there's just like you and I are, I feel like I'm constantly in your head, or you're, there's sort of this thing. I would love for you to share it here so that people can see what you wrote as well. I would love that. Anyway, I have this Google Doc. It probably has like 200 ideas, right? And I'm trying to be better about just putting them out as they feel alive rather than trying to plan it or any idea about how it's going to come. So, so we want to look at this piece around deserving. There's, ultimately it ends up being about four things, but like well, first of all, I'll say this. My premise around deserving is that either we deserve nothing or we deserve everything. And they're basically the same thing. So this idea that like I could deserve and you could not deserve, or that you have to do something to deserve, or it's just kind of irrelevant. So I just want to say that's like my baseline premise. And again, before I get like really rolling here, I just want to make sure that you all know, please, any comments you have, any questions, any way that I'm not clear, anything that you disagree with, that's always fun. Your own personal shares or questions, I invite them all. I'd love to play with this. There's a couple distinctions I want to bring in, but I'd also really love to be in the dialogue. So my premise really is in that realm. Basically, like, on one hand, we all deserve everything. And on the other hand, we basically deserve nothing. Like, I was just born. I didn't do shit to like be born. I didn't do anything. That had nothing to do with me. And yet I exist. And absolutely, have I worked in my life? Have I done things? Have I struggled? Have I created in ways that definitely generate for me? But frankly, when I look at the bounty that was just given to me by my very existence, it's staggering. Like, it's just staggering. So there is definitely a way I tend to sort of think like, none of it really has anything to do with deserving. And so on one axis, I kind of want to look at it like that there's a place where we look at this idea of like, do I deserve? So deserving for ourselves, looking at it from that perspective. And there's a couple pieces there. And then there's like the other, right? Like, did they deserve? And so that's kind of another piece. And then there's different ways we relate to that, either personally or for others. So welcome to all of you who are here. It's great to see your little faces pop up. And again, any questions along the way or your own personal shares around these, I would love. And again, Monica, if you post that article, the link in here, it'd be awesome. And people could see your perspective in the ways that it either is the same or different. I have no idea because I haven't read it. Hi, Sarah. So good to see your face. So I want to look at it first from the perspective of ourselves, like the way that we can ask the question, like, do I deserve? Or I definitely hear it come up in that realm, like that there can be kind of this self-doubt, like, oh, do I deserve that? Am I good enough? And mostly I would respond to that with my basic premise, which is like, You like deserve nothing, but you can have it anyway. But there's what I find is like, I think it actually stems from that same place, which is kind of like a fear or a fear of unworthiness. Like, oh God, do I deserve it? Is it okay? Is it okay to want it? But often there ends up being almost like a backlash to that, which is the like, well, I deserve, and, I deserve a man who treats me like this, or, I deserve a woman like this, or like there's sort of a hard pushback, I think, against our own fear that maybe we don't deserve, and we push it forward like, well, I'm not going to stand for this because I deserve better. And my own experience, and frankly what I see in the people that I end up talking to about this, and when we really start to tease it apart, is that almost always the part that is kind of pushing like that, I'm not going to, like, I deserve better, is actually stemming from the same place as the fear, and that they're really all about like how vulnerable it is to want something, really without knowing whether we're going to get it. That's, there are certainly things in the world to some extent that we can have control over. Like, I'm going to, I want this thing and I'm going to order it on Amazon and it's going to show up on my doorstep in 2 days, and I kind of have control. But like, oh, I want this person to like me, or, I want to be treated in a certain way, or, I want a family and a baby, and we don't really have control over that. And that's incredibly vulnerable. And so it's easy to then get like that forceful piece in response, like, well, I'm not going to stand, I deserve better, is ultimately kind of a contraction around how intensely vulnerable it is just to want something. And I would say, again, it's not even like, do you deserve or don't you deserve? It's irrelevant. You want something, and that's enough. I think that's the most basic way I can say it. Like, actually, that you want something is enough. So Jenna said, my wanting as a child was used against me in the archaic recesses of my mind. I still fear retribution for wanting. Absolutely. I think some of us have a more tangible reference point, right? Like, there might be actual trauma, it might be emotional abuse, we might have even had physical abuse, or sometimes even from that, like I have this experience, this is a total tangent, which is what always happens on these Facebook Lives, but I love this comment, Jenna. And I caught something recently. My son got really into, he would write these lists. He would look in these Lego books he has, and there are these pages that show you other Lego things that you could have. And he wants them all. But there's some he wants more than others. And he started making lists. He's learning how to read and write, and he would take paper and he would literally write lists of like the Lego sets he's wanting the most. And there was sort of this, I noticed it. And then I caught myself wanting to say to him, that's hilarious that your son does that too, Jenna. I caught myself wanting to say to him, well, you might only get one, or something like that. Like that's a lot of Legos. It was like the list of 10 Lego sets. And it was like I caught myself almost saying these, and I thought, well, what is that? So this is awareness towards another, right? But we can have this for ourselves too. The way that we might talk to ourselves, like, man, Kendra, you sure want a lot of shoes, Like, oh, where would that come from? And what I remembered was that I used to write lists when I was a kid. And this is like mildly, why is this embarrassing? I don't know, but I feel embarrassed. I remember being maybe 11 years old, and I had a Christmas list that was like 2 pages long, like the note paper, right? You used to put in your binder, and it had lines and stuff. So they were really small, right? So it was like 2 pages long, and they were categorized, like the clothes I wanted and the makeup I wanted and the books I wanted. It was like categorized. And I don't remember exactly the specifics, but both my mother and my father, who were not together, so it happened like separately, but separate from each other, said something that had me feel ashamed of how much I wanted. And frankly, I don't know, I'm not actually sure from my dad, but from my mom, I think it really came from the most, like it came from a loving place inside her. We had very little money, and the likelihood that I would get a lot of what was on that list was like relatively low. And I think there was just a part of her that was like, oh, I don't want her to get her hopes up and be hurt. And so there must be some way I can say this that will have her, what's the word? Have realistic expectations, right? So that I wouldn't be disappointed. So again, I think it can come from the best place, either from our parents to us, or from us to our children, or to other people, right? It can actually come from some good place inside us. But so all this happened, and it really kind of like, it was uncomfortable feeling inside myself. It was like, I noticed this, and then watching my son do this and realizing it was the same thing inside me. It was like my fear that my son would be disappointed. And I really noticed, wow, I'm afraid he's going to be disappointed in the future. So I want to kind of disappoint him now instead, right? Like by saying, that's a lot of Legos you want, or maybe you'll only get one, or something like that. And it was like, we can do this for ourselves too, right? This is a story about my son, but I just said like, oh, those are the sets you're wishing for the most. Like, okay. and let it be. And he wasn't disappointed at Christmas. He might have said something like, oh, I wish I got that set, or this, or these things, right? We all have these things, but it was just interesting to notice how all that can happen, where it might come from in ourselves, in like our lineage, way far back, who knows, and then where we can then, this is a specific piece maybe as a parent with our children, but also where we can just do this with other humans in our lives and let their wanting be okay. So just to kind of loop this back around, is that place often that I find that where people come from like, I deserve this, is actually just not wanting to feel either how intense or how scary or how vulnerable it feels to want something. And there are so many ways that as humans, I see us not want to just say, I want this. If we say like, well, everybody wants, of course everybody wants, blah, blah, blah. It's actually another way of just not having to feel, I want it. Whether you give it to me or not, I want it. Whether I've done anything to deserve it or not, I want it. So I want to touch just briefly in this realm of like the deserving for ourselves. So this is more kind of in the professional realm rather than the personal realm, but I think they link together. There's a lot of talk around like charging what you're worth or what you deserve. And I just, again, like I just think it's bullshit. You know, what you're worth is priceless. What you charge is irrelevant to what you're worth, and they're just not even connected, but somehow we've linked them up. And it's like a new age personal growth way of the same old tired story that like how much money we have and how many things we have has anything to do with our worth as a person. And most of us would, again, not believe that in the sense of like, well, are rich people worth more than poor people? But we would still use this thing of like, well, I'm going to start charging what I'm worth. And they're saying the same thing. So I just want to dispel that right off the bat. And again, for those of you who've joined, like, please feel free to bring any questions. If there's something I'm saying that's not clear, Let me know if you have a share from your personal life. Let's include it. I'd love to make it a dialogue. If I say something and you really disagree with me, like I'm totally into that too. So bring your comments. I love them. And the other piece I wanted to really dive into is this idea of like whether other people deserve something. And it comes up a lot. I would say the place that it comes up most with the people I work with is in intimate relationship. But I think we do this with our family and with our friends, like kind of anywhere we end up coming really intimately in contact with other people, there becomes the capacity or the, it's not the capacity, it's like a tendency. There's a tendency to start to decide whether we will give something of ourselves based on whether the other person deserves it. But the most, I'm going to use romantic or an intimate relationship as the example, because that's where I see the hook be the strongest, is, and again, most people won't quite say it outright, because we're like, well, we know it's not like, it's not so much about specifically they're deserving, but there really is this sense like, well, he hasn't done blank, like, why should I do X? And it was so beautiful. This is like where it came up with this woman I was talking to this morning in a client session. And I was talking about, or suggesting, inviting that something for her in her marriage that would be really valuable is bringing in praise as a regular practice. And the way I said it to her, I was like, look, he may very well have done, and men, don't take offense here, just that I was talking to a woman. I could easily say this to a man and talk about her. But, you know, he might do like 10,000 stupid things in a day. But I can pretty much guarantee, like if you're in any relationship worth being in, he's done at least one thing right. And our willingness in that space not to discount the things that aren't working in a relationship, not to not ask for things that we need or for communication to shift. It's not to pretend about the things that might not be working, but our capacity and our willingness to actually say like, oh, I loved it when you did that thing, or that moment when this silly, you know, our child did this thing and we looked at each other and we laughed, like it warmed my heart. I loved that moment. That moment was perfection today. I want more of those. And our willingness, like, does he deserve that? I don't know. It doesn't matter. And this is the main point I want to make about how we relate to the people we love in our lives, whether that's our family, whether that's our children, our friends, or whether that's our lover or our intimate partner, is that the way that we relate to them is independent of whether they deserve it. And whether they deserve it is irrelevant. I really mean that. That whether they deserve, like whether they deserve for us to be kind to them, whether they deserve our praise, whether they deserve for us to open our heart or to relax our bodies with them is irrelevant. And again, this is in the realm of like a basically healthy relationship, and which doesn't, you know, even inside of that, that you might need couples coaching, or you might need therapy, or there might still be communication pieces that need to be worked out or discussed. You can still ask for things. But this is actually about, I mean, it's kind of weird because it's in the realm of intimacy and connection. It's in the realm where we actually do need each other, right? So it's not about separation, but my decision to create like a field of generosity around myself, or a field of love, or if the relationship that I want to be in is a relationship where we praise each other, then I get to do that no matter how you behave. Sarah said, grace is unmerited favor. Exactly. That's exactly it. And then, yeah, going on to say that it's beautiful because it's unmerited, unearned, undeserved. And it's like, it's just irrelevant. Like that's the best way I've come to be able to describe it, because it's not like give it to them even when they behave badly. It's not about like do it even when they don't deserve it. It's just like their deserving is actually irrelevant to your own decision to create what it is you want in your relationships. And I feel like I always have to say, like, of course, if you're in an abusive relationship, this doesn't, it's not that it doesn't apply, but it's different. And this isn't even about always being a nice person, right? Like you might still fight. There might still be things you're like, I really need this from you, or I need us to go to therapy, or I need us to find a new way to communicate when we're angry. This doesn't erase any issues or problems or struggles that we may have, but I posit that even inside all of that, and to me, this actually speaks to the power that we have as individuals. Absolutely, something needs to come back, but if we're waiting for them to bring it first, or to deserve, or we do one thing and then like they don't give us what we expected in response and so we stop, we are actually diminishing the power we have as individuals to change the entire field around us. We actually get to decide what happens in our space, largely based on what it is that we create. Jenna said, sometimes when I go out of my way to do something for my son and then he acts out, I feel resentful. Yeah, totally. Been there. It's unintentionally conditional generosity. Yeah. And then you feel guilty. And then just seeing the clarity of the distinction between worthiness and my own volition. Yeah, totally. I mean, and I think with all these things, it's always important to remember, like, we're just gonna fail. It's gonna happen. And I think, maybe this is just because this is in my own life is like this, but I find that parenting and intimate relationship and family, like family of origin, they're just guaranteed to push our buttons in ways where we're like, fuck, like I knew that thing and I still did the other thing. Like, why did I do that? And one of the things I think it's important to remember is that actually in every moment we have the choice to choose again, right? So, I mean, I've totally done that with my kids before. I'll be like, why would I want to do anything for you? You're being really rude to me. And it's like, okay, that's somewhat irrelevant. It's also true, right? Like but there's also been moments where I've caught myself and rather than sort of like continuing down that, or even spending all the time feeling the shame about it, is like, I can just turn and be like, I'm sorry. Actually, I didn't mean what I said. I felt frustrated, I felt hurt. And I said something I didn't mean, and I'm sorry. And we just get to turn it, right? It doesn't even mean like, I think as parents too, there's probably different ways this plays out in intimacy, but as parents, we can do something generous. They can be little shits. We can punish them, and we feel ashamed. And so we like give them a treat on top of it. And it's like the whole thing is actually all part of the same fucked up little knot. And the point is less like, am I being a good person or a bad person? Am I feeling ashamed? Am I giving them a treat? Am I making up for it? And it's more like, how do we literally stop making knots on top of knots in any moment? The woman I was talking to this morning, again, she shared that she had an experience of missing her partner. And instead of just saying like, oh, I was missing you, or like, it feels good to have you with us, she picked a fight. And I was like, yeah, so human, right? So human. And a lot of that, I mean, first of all, I think we often pick fights because what we want is connection, and it's like an easy way to get interaction. And it's so tender to reveal that part that's like, oh, it feels good to be with you. Or like when you were away, I noticed my heart was actually longing for you. It's like so intensely vulnerable. So much easier to pick a fight. But in that moment, if I notice, I mean, I've literally done the same thing with my boyfriend or with, people I work with, right, that I'm close with. There's actually the chance to even notice like, oh, I'm picking a fight, and to be like, I was just picking a fight with you because I want to be close to you, right? We actually have the opportunity to be intimate in that moment and to actually just change things in an instant. So I think the pieces that feel the most key to me, like what I'm like, this feels like these are the keys to this. And then I'd love to hear for any of you who are joining, like if you have any questions about what you've seen thus far or what I'm saying, or any last shares or pieces. Probably going to sign off here in about 5 minutes. So like the key pieces for me are like ultimately, and this is really just my perspective, you don't have to buy into it. For me, it's deeply empowering actually to just be like, I deserve nothing. Like this, the fact that I'm here at all, it's a freaking miracle. And it helps me to just not get hung up on this idea of like, well, do I deserve it? Do I not deserve it? Well, I deserve it. Gosh darn it, or charging what I'm worth. Like all those things become a little bit irrelevant in the field of like, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether I deserve them. And then that piece specifically of that, so much of the time trying to decide whether you deserve something or don't deserve something is simply, those are both mechanisms for avoiding the feeling of simply wanting something. When you jump, like there's, I want, and then immediately jumping away from that to like, oh my God, do I deserve it? Or like, gosh darn it, I deserve it. They're actually both mechanisms for getting away from just like how intensely vulnerable it is to be like, I want it. If no one else in the universe ever wants this thing, I want it. If I never get it, I still want it. If people think I'm stupid for wanting it, I still want it. Intensely, intensely vulnerable. And then on the other side of like whether other people deserve things, I would say my main like piece around that is it doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter, if they deserve it or if they don't deserve it. But that we each get to relate to people the way that we want our relationship to be. And again, like my caveat all the time is like, yeah, over time, if I'm just, I mean, this is a really tricky point because a lot of times it's like, oh, well then if I'm generous long enough, or if I bring the praise long enough, then they'll do it back. And then this is kind of what Jenna was referring to. It's like this unconscious conditionality, right? Like I'm waiting for it to come back. And frankly, we just have to create like the energetic field no matter what. And paradoxically, it's like and of course, if you're in a relationship where you're like, wow, that person never calls me if I don't call them, I don't think I really want to do that anymore. It's different than like, well, gosh darn it, I deserve to be treated better or something. It's just like, I just want a friend who calls me. That's what I want. So again, it's kind of irrelevant. Do they deserve your time or not deserve your time? It's irrelevant. They're doing them. You can ask for the things you want, but there's a way that you can actually you can treat them the way that you want people to be treated in your field, regardless of whether they deserve it or not. How, again, it's not even like because they deserve it or they don't deserve it. It simply becomes irrelevant. becomes irrelevant. So, ooh, I like this one. Julie said envy. What would I say? Let me come back to that in a second. I see Emma here. Nice to see you. This is wonderful, perfectly timed. Thank you. I'm glad that this is relevant to you. I mean, just knowing you a little bit, like intimate partnership and diving into the realm of family is huge, 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 because I guarantee, I mean, again, I could say this to men, for the mothers of our children, but I think there is this place, like as women, and I hope this is okay for me to say, Emma, but the fathers of our children, like they're just never gonna do enough to deserve it. So we have to practice in this way. So I've been listening about othering, and for me, it speaks to me most in my relationship with my mother. Absolutely. Hardest relationship. I mean, I know so many people that's true for. I suppose forgiveness is kind of irrelevant too, because that will leave space for whether they deserve it or not. Yes. Well, I would say it can be about kindness and warmth, and it can also be forgiveness. Again, I mean, I think the trick about forgiveness, and I'm not going to go super far down this rabbit hole because it's just a little different, but there's two things about forgiveness. And one is that I do think that we often think, well, they don't deserve to be forgiven, fuck them. And they probably don't. Or they do, and it doesn't matter. But that we actually get to be the ones who offer forgiveness for our own sake. Like literally to free ourselves. The other tricky one about forgiveness is, as far as I can tell, it's just not a one-time deal. Like forgiveness actually becomes an action just like kindness and warmth. It's not like, I was nice to you last time, done with that. It's not like, oh, I forgave you last Tuesday, I never have to do that again. It's literally like, oh, I'm forgiving you again. And it's a choice. It's a total choice. You do not have to forgive anybody. And sometimes you won't want to do it. And sometimes you'll do it anyway. And sometimes you'll hope you can forgive and you just can't find it. And all of that. It's all part of the play, the interplay. But it becomes like, it's like a lifelong journey, right? Of actually forgiveness as a verb that you do over and over. Let me just check this piece. I want to come back to this piece about envy because it's really interesting. Fiona said, I was attending a neuroscience-based workshop on intimacy, Sarah Payton, and the deserving thing reminds me of the left hemisphere brain that doesn't recognize the other, and our right hemisphere that can recognize an other and is our emotional process center, is the part that needs to be engaged with in order to move through the deserving. Let's see, our right hemisphere that recognizes another is the part that needs to be engaged with in order to move through the deserving defense mechanism. So I am not a neuroscience person. I think if what I'm reading, what you're saying, it sounds accurate. And it's this cool thing. Again, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too far because I'll do another thing on this, but there's an inherent tension, I think, as humans. And that there really is, I mean, even the way you describe it, I don't know that I knew that really about neuroscience, but like even in the hemispheres of our brain, there's a part of us that actually experiences it all as one, no other. And then there's a part that experiences us as separate. And they're both true. So I think there's a lot of what I would call spiritual bypassing that's like, we're just all one. Like and it's like, even the way you describe that, like literally in our bodies, it's only half true. So we can't ignore that part. But at the same time, I think that the way we were created and the fact that we're actually born into a world that puts my body separate from your body, it's part of the beauty because it actually allows us to relate to each other. There is no relating to each other unless we're a little bit separate, actually. And it's kind of fun. It's where we get to have tension points. Actually, like if we were all one, there actually would be no play, right? There'd be no sex. It's like, that's just part of where the fun happens, and it's part of where the challenge happens. So anyway, that's a really cool comment, and thanks for sharing. So envy. I'm going to wait just a minute and see. I'm curious, Julie, how that question comes up for you in response to this topic. Like, why did envy come up around the idea of deserving? And if we have a moment to actually get a response, it'd be really cool to see what your specific piece is. Because envy is envy, jealousy, like super juicy topics, but possibly for another Facebook Live. So I'm gonna fill some space here and wait and see if I can get Julie's clarification here on envy. If anybody else has any questions, that would be awesome also. I guess I'll just put, I think I said this earlier, but I think it kind of can't be overstated, which is this is really challenging work. It's like, in some ways I would call this some of the work of like the deepest self-responsibility, and particularly challenging because a lot of like self-responsibility work is predicated on making oneself separate from others. Like, I can do it alone. Like, I've got this, pull myself up by my bootstraps. Like, I'm responsible for everything in my life. You're responsible for you. So there's like an inherent kind of separation built into it, which not only do I believe is inaccurate, like it's just not the way the world's made. We are connected and we do impact each other. But I think that it comes up that way, and people want to do that because it makes it a little bit easier. It's so hard to actually take responsibility for ourselves, and it's even harder to do when I stay intimate with another. And so this particular work of self-responsibility, but actually staying intimate and permeable is like so deep and really so challenging. So I think it really just deserves a lot of compassion for ourselves and for others. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up here. It's been super fun to have all of you who are here live. And again, I'm hoping that Julie comes in and clarifies this comment of envy. What would I say? Because I'm not quite sure what you're asking for there, Julie, but I think envy is a super juicy topic. So maybe you can bring something in and that'll spark another Facebook Live. Could do a whole thing about envy and jealousy. And yeah, I really appreciate all of the shares and comments live today. And for any of you who are watching the replay, I always love your comments on the replay as well. And I'll come back and we can at least have some written dialogue about it. And sometimes it does really spark something where I'm like, oh, I want to do like a whole thing on that. So please don't withhold your comments from us. And yeah, thanks so much for being here with me. Whether you were live or watching the replay, I appreciate your time and attention. All right. Ciao.